Yeah, okay. So you know that it's a free and confidential counseling benefit for all the employees of Wood County as well as immediate family members. We do assessment, short-term counseling, and referral as needed. You get up to 8 sessions per problem, so you never run out of EAP. And we have intake counselors answering the phone Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And if you call on the weekends or on holidays, you can connect with our answering service. If you tell them that it's an emergency, they'll page somebody to call you back right away. So we're available for you 24/7. And again, it's free and confidential benefits. So I just want to make sure you're aware of that. So today we're talking about generations in the workplace. This is a really fun topic for me. I'm excited to talk about it today. So let's just start out with a little audience participation. Okay, Susie walks over to John's desk and begins telling him about a project they're working on. John continues typing at his computer. Finally, Susie says, "Oh, I can see this isn't that important to you," and walks away. John yells after her, "I was listening." Have you ever seen that kind of generational problem that some people think they can multitask and other people think that you shouldn't do that? So what do you think? Who's right in this situation?
Well, she should have said, "Do you have a minute?"
Yeah.
So they're both wrong and they're both right, so, you know.
So
He
listen-
could have said, "Can you hang on just a second," or whatever.
So either of them could have handled the situation in a better way, right? How about this one? The new CEO of your company is walking around introducing themselves to staff. One younger employee says to him, "Hey, don't you live at 123 Street? I think you're my new neighbor." And the CEO agrees. So the younger employee says, "Awesome, I can get a ride to work with you." Another employee is angry because they think this younger employee is being presumptuous. What do you think?
Probably not really
Probably not. Would you be angry at this young employee? No? What would you think? What?
Good luck, yeah.
I think it depends on the company.
Depends on the company. Right. So a lot of times we see kind of these generational rifts where maybe younger workers are doing things that are really irritating to more experienced workers, and so we see these divides and these rifts happen. But I would challenge each of you to not let that happen. And if you see a younger employee kind of acting in ways that aren't politically correct in the workplace, right? There are hierarchies, even if those aren't spelled out or written anywhere, and protocols and just ways to respect certain people. So maybe pull this guy aside and be like, "Hey, you know what you said, maybe you were coming across as a joke, but it kind of came across as disrespectful to whatever." And just do some coaching with them, right? Because sometimes new employees, they come into the workplace like puppies, right? They're really excited and they just graduated college and they just want to do it, and they're like making all these mistakes, right? And so instead of getting mad at them, just sit down and do some coaching and some mentoring with them and help them to get on the right track so that they can become the experienced, wise employees that we hope they turn out to be, right? And it goes both ways too. So in front of you, you have a generational differences chart. This one and this one kind of match. They might be a little bit different. I don't know if you noticed the dates aren't always exactly the same when we talk about generational differences because there's no really hard lines, right? It's kind of a transition from one generation to the next. So sociologists might draw those lines a little bit differently. But generally, today we're talking about traditionalists, which I think we're going to skip because at this point, traditionalists are mostly out of the workforce. You might find one here or there, but for the purposes today, we're going to skip the traditionalists and just go right into baby boomers, also known as the Vietnam generation or the me generation. We don't often think of baby boomers that way, but they're actually the ones who kind of started the philosophy that everybody's a winner and everybody should get a trophy and we should all just get along, right? We're going to talk about why that is. Then Generation X, also known as Gen X, baby busters or post-boomers. We're going to talk about Generation Y, also known as Generation Y, like the question. The Peter Pan generation, does anybody know why they got that nickname? Because they never want to grow up, right? Or the millennials, also the millennial generation. Echo boomers, because the baby boomers, as we know, were a really big cohort. Generation X, not so big, and then the Generation Y was big again, so we call that an echo of the baby boomer, just in terms of numbers. Nexters, digital natives, and then finally Generation Z, also known as the iGen, centennials, plurals, or neo-digital natives. So we'll talk about all of those. So companies need to be generationally savvy. Baby boomers are entering retirement, but almost 30% are still working. Millennials are now the largest cohort at 34% of the workforce, and Generation Z is just entering the workforce, right? So, and those numbers are changing all the time as people are retiring and more people are entering. So this data is based on 2011, I think. It's a little bit old, but still pretty relevant. So today we're going to define the differences between the generational cohorts, discuss the benefits of becoming a generationally savvy company, and describe what a generationally savvy company looks like. So again, sociologists have found trends within organizations, but these trends do not describe every single person of that generation, right? There are huge variations and differences, and so just because you know certain things about like baby boomers or Xers, you can't always assume that every person from that generation is going to act like that or that's going to be their values. But these trends have come out of research that sociologists have done, and they found that there is some truth to these. So just be careful about using stereotypes and applying them generally in every situation. So, why is generationally intelligence, we'll call it that, generational intelligence, important for companies? First of all, it's competition for good talent. As your older, experienced workers are retiring, you want to grab the best employees for your company that you possibly can. And if you have huge generational divides and rifts, and it's your culture is bad, your morale is low, people don't want to come and work here. But if you have a work environment where people are getting along and they're collaborating and they're building that teamwork, and it doesn't matter if you're 70 or if you're 17, you know, you can share ideas in a respectful way, that's a place that people want to come work. So, are you utilizing the great people you already have, and are you attracting good talent? That's kind of one of the underlying reasons why this is important. And then more generations are working together, as we know that that's true from the last slide. And productivity and results are linked to work environment. So that's a lot of the work that EAP does, is that when your culture is bad and people are crabby and they aren't getting along, your work suffers. So EAP can come in and help you with those problems, and generational components are a large piece of the work that we do. So when you have that generational intelligence, your work culture improves, you make stronger decisions, you have more diverse perspectives, and you can appeal to a greater employee and customer base. So I said we're going to skip traditionalists in the absence of time today. Oops. And we'll start with baby boomers. So baby boomers are generally born from 46 to 64, and they're the post-World War II era generation, right? So the parents coming back from World War II, and then they're making all these babies. That's why it's such a big cohort. And as of 2011, 38% of the workforce. So again, some audience participation. What were some defining events for the baby boomer generation? So add about 20 years to this, when they were, you know, in their formative, adolescent kind of age. What was happening at that time that shaped them as a generation? Yeah. The Cold War, yeah. What else?
Vietnam.
Vietnam, that was a big one, right?
And the start of the civil rights movement.
Yes, civil rights movement.
I lived in Mexico.
What else can you think of? Women's liberation, yeah. All right, here's some things that I was able to pull together from some research. Birth control pills introduced in 1950. So again, women have more control over their reproduction. Martin Luther King Jr. leads the March on Washington, so civil rights, like somebody mentioned. President Kennedy assassinated. That was a big thing for this generation. U.S. sends troops to Vietnam. U.S. lands on the moon, so we're having some technological advances at that time. Women's liberation demonstrations. And the influence, parents wanted a better life for their children. So we see the traditionalists as kind of like stoic, you do what you're told, we have these hierarchies, we live by tradition, there are rules in life, kind of a generation. But they were sick of working so hard. They had, you know, the history of the Depression kind of in the background of their mind, and they wanted something better for their baby boomer children. So we see them giving them more things, spending more money on them, really investing in their education and just moving forward in life. So, and we really see that kind of play out as history goes forward. And then there's the global rebuilding, the optimistic future orientation that the baby boomers have, where post-World War II, the economy was booming, and people were getting material things that they never had before. And so it was a very optimistic viewpoint that the baby boomers grew up with. This is the first time in history that report cards included works well with others. So baby boomers generally have a very strong team collaboration. They generally like to avoid conflict. They just want peace and everybody get along. They work hard, though, to do whatever it takes and go the extra mile. They believed in the American dream, that if you put in your 100% effort and have the work ethic of our traditionalist parents, you can have whatever you want to have in life, like the true American dream people. And so baby boomers certainly did not shy away from hard work. In fact, to some extent, they were kind of known as a workaholic generation, right? They lived to work. And in technological advancements, they had the television. So we start to see that global connection happening where we can know what's going on in California or in other places of the world. We can know what's going on with the Vietnam War, with these demonstrations, because we have television and the technology to see that. So it's pretty exciting. So their values, they have that very, very strong work ethic. They tend to be very good communicators, and they tend to focus, again, on that teamwork and collaboration. But at this stage of their life, thinking developmentally, many baby boomers find themselves in that sandwich generation where their parents are getting older and they're finding they have to caretake for their parents, but their millennial kids are still at home, right? And they're still taking care of the kids. Not a lot of millennials at this point. Most of them are out of the house at this point, but there was that period, right? And so baby boomers find themselves in that sandwich generation where they're taking care of the older generation and the younger. Baby boomers are thinking about aging and retirement, leaving a legacy for themselves. They're starting to think about what is the meaning and the purpose of my life. Why have I spent all these years on Earth? So that's kind of what they're thinking about. Their work style. They have confidence in tasks. Generally, baby boomers like to be told what to do. They like the step-by-step process, right? That's just generally a comfortable work style. But they do like that emphasis on team building. They like to have the meetings to talk about the meetings and let's do the planning process and let's figure all this stuff out. They generally are conflict avoidant, and so they seek that collaborative group decision making. Do we have any baby boomers in the house today? Am I doing your generation justice? Does that sound kind of like, yeah? Okay. So Kathy's going to lead a little discussion here about baby boomers in the workplace. Go for it.
Yeah, so we're just going to do a small collaborative discussion. If you guys want to get in like a small groups, you can just converse amongst yourself about what kind of assets do baby boomers bring to the workplace, what are challenges, maybe some examples of challenges that you guys have seen, and what motivates them, and what keeps them motivated.
So just brainstorm in small groups quickly, and then we'll come back together and discuss what you came up with.
Well,
Well, Mr. Baby Boomer.
Let's do, the baby boomers bring
A lot of knowledge.
Work ethic?
work ethic, experience.
They're teachers now.
What are some challenges do you think that the baby boomers have to face? And do you guys have any examples?
Technology.
I even have problems with
I don't think it's so much technology. I mean, we can grasp, spreadsheets and networking and stuff, but social media, no, we're out of there. And I have a flip phone. I take a lot of good photos. So.
Right. And some people think that older generations don't like change, and that's why, there's problems. And that's not true at all, right? The traditionalists, baby boomers, they've seen tremendous change in their lifetime. But we have to think of it from a developmental perspective, that when you're 20 to 30 years old, you're at your prime of life, you're learning things quickly, you're just kind of moving along. And when you're 40, 50, 60, you have all that intrinsic knowledge and experience, but it doesn't translate to learning things quickly and doing things fast, right? So if we can just look at, it's not that they don't like change, it's just that change is different for them than it is for our younger generations, and that's okay, right? Good. Anything else? All right, well, we're going to keep moving. So next we're going to talk, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the baby boomer tradition somewhat. In the traditionalist or the veteran cohort, they had the usually the dad who went to work and the mom who stayed home and took care of the kids, right? That was a very traditional family. Then you move into the baby boomers where we have all this women's rights and liberation and things like that. And so women were entering the workforce, they were becoming more educated than previously had been true, but they were still stuck in a lot of those traditional roles where even though they went to work 40 hours a week just like their husband, they still came home and had to have dinner on the table and the house cleaned up and the child rearing, right? So baby boomer women were pulling double duty, and I don't know if any of you grew up in that or if you saw it, like, that was my mom, right? She had a huge burden of responsibility. But now we see that trend shifting even more, that millennials and Generation Zs are expecting their partners to have more of a 50-50 partnership. So if I'm working 40 hours a week and my husband has the day off, he better be making dinner, right? Whereas baby boomer women didn't necessarily have that, right? So that was something interesting that I just wanted to point out. I think baby boomer women are incredible. So anyway, Generation X from 65 to 78, almost a third of the workforce. They were really the generation that saw divorce. Divorce really became a thing for Generation X's. So they were the latchkey generation. Generally, both of their parents were working. Sometimes their parents were divorced. They came home after school. There was nobody there to take care of them. They didn't have programs like Boys and Girls Club. So they just kind of were left to figure it out. Make your own SpaghettiOs, you know, figure out what you're going to do after school. And so with Generation X, we see a big rise in gangs and in street drugs and some of the bad stuff in life that we hadn't seen previously. So what were some of the defining events for Generation X?
The Challenger.
The Challenger explosion. Yeah. What else? Can you think of anything else? What?
Is that like the days of Woodstock?
Days of Woodstock.
MTV.
Yeah, MTV. Yep, video games, Atari, Nintendo. Yeah. So there was the Watergate scandal, Tandy and Apple market PCs, so the computer becomes big for this generation. Massive corporate layoffs in 1979. So again, thinking about that from the baby boomer perspective, where if you work hard, your company's gonna pay you back, we have this retirement, right? And then things kind of hit the fan in 79 and then again in the 90s. That really shook the baby boomers' worldview. They were depending on that, and now everything is mixed up. Like your company's not loyal to you, and you may not have retirement. Where the younger generations kind of grow up with more of a cynical, skeptical attitude, like we don't know if we're gonna have Social Security, we can't bank on it, but the baby boomers really did. So AIDS identified in 81, the Chernobyl disaster in 86, Challenger disaster, stock market plummets, the Berlin Wall falls, that was a good thing, right? And then technology, the personal computer. So we see that there was a lot of tragedy for this generation, and a lot of, like again, the street gangs and the drugs, and Generation X, as young people, had a hard time. So their values are really self-reliance, right? I need to be able to depend on me. And they like things to be in measurable results. So it's not like, oh, that feels good, let's do that. Generation Xers are like, that feels good. Like, what's the bottom line? What's the outcome? I want a number here. And they tend to be really flexible and versatile. And their concerns at this point in life are raising their kids and their finances. They're not to retirement age yet, but they're probably starting to think about it a little bit more seriously than they did when they were a little bit younger. A lot of them still have student loans. I don't know so much about childcare expenses. Most of their children are out of that age. So anything else that you can think of that Generation X's are kind of focused on right now?
I think some of them do have child care because they put off having children later
That's true.
than a lot of the generations before.
Yep, that is true. And one thing I didn't mention about baby boomers either is that a lot of baby boomers are finding themselves raising their grandchildren, which is a new trend that's actually a pretty big trend. So baby boomers might actually have childcare expenses at this point. Good. So their work style, they want things to be done and to be done right. They like that high quality. They tend to be very productive. But whereas baby boomers live to work, Generation X's kind of take more of a, you know, I'm not living to work, I'm working to live. Right? I need that paycheck so that I can live the rest of my life. They like flexible work hours and job sharing is appealing. They're free agents, whereas baby boomers tended to be really loyal to a company. Generation X saw kind of, you know, the massive layoffs and things, and so they said, I don't have to stay at this company. If it doesn't fit with me, if it's not a good company to work for, I can move around. They're comfortable with authority but not impressed with the titles. They believe that respect is earned, and it doesn't matter if you're the president or the CEO, we're still human beings. Whereas baby boomers saw things in more of a hierarchy. they tend to be technically competent, and we see more of that global connection. So, and ethnic diversity with immigration and things like that with the Generation X. So the Generation X is really kind of the transitional generation between the boomers and the Ys, and we'll see there's quite a disparity between those two generations, and the X kind of fills in the gap. All right, go for it.
We're just gonna kind of do the same thing that we did with the baby boomers about what are the challenges, assets, and what keeps them motivated, or what doesn't keep them motivated.
So brainstorm with your groups.
Elimination X brings
I'm sorry, what did you say?
the assets.
Their flexibility, they can work on their own, but also in a group.
Anything else? Challenges.
They also like that flexibility to use both to their advantage, and if you're so structured and rigid, that can be a problem.
Do you guys have any examples of challenges that you guys see in the workplace today?
Well, sometimes
We talked about
Yeah.
flex scheduling, and here in the courthouses, we're public servants, or wherever we work in the county, we're supposed to be open 8 to 4:30, so it's kind of hard to give that flexibility, especially in smaller departments. In my department, I used to have, we could flip off one week, you can come in at 7, and the next week, the other one can come in at 7. I get to be there all the time, but if someone's got a doctor's appointment or vacation, the other one's gonna have to change their schedule back. So this is June. So it's a challenge to accommodate them without not accommodating the mission of the county to be open 8 to 4:30 and provide services.
it's absolutely a generational change.
Flexibility, I think that although this generation may not have, when we think childcare, younger children in childcare, flexibility for older children that are in events and things, so they have flexibility to go to those things. With the work-life balance is important.
With after-school events
Yeah.
and sporting and, yeah, absolutely. What about what keeps them motivated?
So flexible scheduling is definitely one thing. What else?
Money.
Yeah. Yep.
So
And
you
money.
can't live, I want the money so that I can spend it.
I do a session on motivation, and money tops the charts, and this is what people want from their jobs. They want the salary and benefits, and then everything kind of falls after that. So that's one thing that we all have in common, right? Good. All right. So Generation X, again, they're that gap generation. So if you have generational rifts or differences on your team, you might want to look at your Generation X's and say, we're just not getting along. What ideas do you have for us to kind of be on the same page? Because they often can see it both ways, being in the middle. In fact, that was my boss a lot of the time. When I joined EAP as the young person fresh out of school, and then we had Gary, who was, a traditionalist, really. He's one of the oldest generations in the workforce, and I was like, oh, Gary, you're so outdated. You don't even use email. You're kind of irrelevant to counseling at this point. And he would always say that there was 3 things that people needed. The trifecta of good health. They needed adequate sleep and rest, healthy diet, and exercise. And I'm like, oh, Gary, we're so advanced from when we went to school, But now that I've been in EAP a while, I see the wisdom behind his words. That really is the foundation of what people need. And now I just appreciate him so much more. And so I'm glad that my boss took the time to invest and coach me in valuing him, being an older worker, and taking time to coach him to not treat me like this kid out of school who doesn't know anything, because I brought skills to the workplace too. So that's one of the things, the benefits of Generation Xers. So millennials, born from 79 to 97, they are the on-the-go people, right? They have so much information coming at them all the time. They can sift quickly through it and make decisions, right? So sometimes that looks like they're impatient or they can't ever just focus, and that's kind of true. As of 2011, they were 34% of the workforce. So what were defining events for the millennial generation?
Y2K.
Y2K, yes. What? 9/11.
Fall of communism. kind of something.
Mm-hmm. Oklahoma City bombing, Princess Diana dies, Columbine shooting, World Trade Center attacks, Iraq war begins, Hurricane Katrina, a lot of tragedy in their life that forms their kind of their worldview on life. Like, is my world safe? I don't know, because I look at the TV and there's all this terrible stuff happening. So they tend to be a little bit more skeptical than, of course, the baby boomers, but maybe even a little bit of the Generation X's. They're digital natives, they have that global connection. So whereas baby boomers were connected through TV, the Generation X's started to get connected through the internet, and now Generation Ys are connected through social media. So we can have conversations and discuss ideas from people all around the world. So the big technology, of course, was the internet. So their values, they really like goals and achievements, which is kind of the antithesis to the reputation that they have, that they're Peter Pans who never want to grow up and they're just being lazy in their parents' basement, right? And that certainly is a piece of this generation, but for a large number of us millennials, we do like goals and we are striving to achieve. We have that global consciousness. So how what we do here in Wisconsin affect people in other countries and other places of the world? How can we sell our products to other markets? You know, things like that. They're just constantly thinking on that large scale level. And of course using social networking, although their Generation Ys are good at it, they certainly have nothing on the Zs, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But their millennial concerns, getting their career on track. So most of the millennials have moved out of the basement and they're now working and they're starting their career. Some of them it's taken a little bit longer. Some of them are very well established at this point. Sometimes some of them have had children already. Some of them are just looking to have children, right? That late start kind of a thing. A lot of millennials are worried about their student loan debt, and that is a huge burden hanging over a lot of their heads. And super parenting we don't often think of. Now that the millennials have those young children and they're reading the parenting magazines and all these things that good parents need to do, it's a lot of pressure for millennial parents that parents of previous generations maybe don't understand or don't recognize that it's out there. That you have to have your kids in dance and they have to be getting good grades so they can get into the best schools and they can go to college and blah, 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 right? It's overwhelming. So just paying attention to that. Any things that I missed? What other concerns do millennials have?
I think financial too is a big part, because you have your kids and you're paying your own loans, but what are you gonna do for your kids? Because, you know, do you want them to go through the same thing you are with paying off your loans?
Right.
Like creating that retirement.
Cell phone plans gotta be
Mhm.
next one.
I think finding and knowing your purpose is a big thing.
Yeah. Good. Any other ones? All right. So the millennial work style, novelty. They want things to be changing all the time because they're used to that brain stimulation, right? Through computers, through video games, through internet, that constantly they are stimulated. So when things stay the same too long in the workplace, your millennials might get kind of antsy. They want things now because they're used to that, you know, putting your grades up on Skyward so you can see them right now. You know, you turn in a paper and you want your grade by the end of the day, kind of a thing. On-demand feedback. So if you type your boss an email and say, "How am I doing here?" the traditionalist would never even type that email. If there's nothing said, then there's no problem. The baby boomer might type that email, and we could wait a few weeks for the answer. The Xer, maybe a couple days. The Generation Y person, they want the answer back in the hour, right? Let's go. How are we doing here? They thrive on multitasking because they have brains that are wired to be able to process a lot of information quickly. They like active involvement. They are very much, even though they grew up with social networking and things like that on the computer, they enjoy that teamwork kind of atmosphere and they want to have a voice and an input in their work. They're unlikely to compromise life outside of work, but they will incorporate work into their personal life. So they're definitely the work to live kind of people, and they set very strong boundaries on, you're not going to infringe on my personal time unless I can bring my computer or my phone home and do some work while I'm with my kids, kind of a thing. So they'll work with you in that way, but on some things they're not going to compromise because their personal life comes first. And that can definitely be a generational problem in the workplace. So even more so than the Xers, they seek that flexible work environment and dress code. So sometimes, like there's another county close to here that has implemented a dress code policy where you need to wear khakis and collared shirts. My husband works for this county, and he came home and he's like, "This is the new dress code." And I'm like, "That's crazy! How can they expect people to, like, I was so mad, like Generation Y, right? We should be able to be expressive and free with our clothes." And so you have to think about that. that sometimes it's finding the balance between, you know, this is what we want professionalism to be, and these are the kind of workers that we're excluding if we, you know, set our standard here. So you gotta kind of think about that and find the balance.
Then just get in your groups one last time and talk about the motivations, the challenges, and the assets. Technology.
Find stuff.
And knowing how to use it.
Yeah, that too.
The multitasking is often a great thing here, because, you know, someone comes in and you gotta switch what you're doing to deal with that person or the phone rings, you have to switch what you're doing. You're not just sitting there working on one thing in most of our offices. I mean, it's, because we're customer service driven in most part. Being able to drop what you're doing, pick up, and then go back is really.
Yeah, and their brains are wired for that complexity, right? Workplaces are so much more complex today than they were even 10 or 20 years ago. And the millennials come in being able to handle all that complexity because they're used to all that, like, media bombardment and things like that. So that's one of the assets that they bring, certainly.
What about challenges?
I think the big challenge is they don't work as well. For example, I'll get an email but I've got another 120 emails. I'm not gonna stop and answer that one right away and then I get another email, because I didn't answer the first one.
Because they're impatient, yeah.
Yeah, they always want what's next, what's next, what's next.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think keeping them engaged is, here's your job, well, if that gets mundane, okay, what's gonna keep me here?
Definitely a challenge.
This may not necessarily be a challenge, but I guess I see it this way, is that with other generations and then our millennial generations, the use of social media and networking outside of work has spilled into work. So, like, ethical boundaries, who are you Facebook friends with, who are you not, how do you communicate? Because millennials don't communicate that way. That's where they share pictures of their kids and stuff. And so then on Monday, it seems that those that are friends know that's how it sparks the conversation. So, kind of a challenge for those that aren't connected outside of work anymore.
Absolutely. And you kind of touched on this a little bit, but what about motivation?
I don't know if this is like a generations thing or if it's like a colors thing or something, but I would say, like achievements, like knowing that you've, like having a task list and knowing, hey, I checked this off today.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is true for the millennial generation, that sometimes they come in and in the business world and they're not quite refined yet. They don't really understand all the etiquette and the protocols and things. But if somebody sits down and mentors them and says, here's a career path for you, you're starting at the bottom, and I know you feel like you should be starting up here, right? Kind of that entitlement thing that millennials have a reputation for. But you're starting here, but you can get here, and this is the path on how that works. These are the things you need to work on. I'm going to support you. I invest in you. And millennials just thrive with that kind of attention. So if you can set up either official or unofficial mentoring relationships in your workplace with more experienced workers and younger workers, you'd be amazed at the synergy that you can create on your team. Good. All right, so Generation Z, our last generation, we gotta go through this so fast. And we don't know a whole lot about Generation Z yet. As the youngest generation, we don't even know where the cutoff is and when this generation ends and the next one begins, because they're not old enough really for us to really see like where the trends are gonna start shifting. But they're 25% of the population and the largest cohort yet. So we had a big cohort in the baby boomers, bigger cohort in the Generation Y, and even bigger cohort, so of course our population is growing. They are very non-traditional, as you can imagine. They are exposed to and very accepting of non-traditional families, blended families, alternative lifestyles, all kinds of things like that. So what were defining events for Generation Zs? 9/11. Yep, some of them might be a little bit young to remember it. What else?
I can't remember all the initials, but like the transgender and.
LGBTQ?
Yes.
Yeah.
And along with that, the acceptance now of same-sex marriages, being actually legally recognized.
Yes, the legalization of same-sex marriage is a big one.
First colored president.
Yes, right. Anything else that you can think of? So terrorism escalates, Al-Qaeda and ISIS. YouTube was launched in 2005. I think YouTube has changed the world, right? iPhone is launched, the first black president, gay marriage legalized, everything that you said, right? So if you think about what that means to them as a cohort, they see the world full of opportunities and that very collaborative, and we should respect differences, and we're all connected, right? Kind of this global connection mentality that we're all in this together. So their values, they really value volunteering, and part of this I think is because of the school systems requiring the younger generations to put in a certain amount of volunteer work before they can graduate, and I think a lot of the people from this generation really value that experience, and it does shape them to some extent. They believe in going green, energy efficiency, doing what's right for the environment, of course technology. They want to make a difference, right? And in this global society, they realize that they have a voice on social media or whatever it is, and they're using it for what they believe is good and right. And actually, this cohort is kind of good with money so far. It looks like they might be okay. Generation Y, man, we came into this kind of, we had a lot of learning to do, but we learned from our mistakes, and now the Generation Zs are kind of on track from the beginning to be a little bit more wiser about how they're saving and spending their money. So their concerns, they actually did some research on this and found that Generation Zs would rather skip meals than lose their internet connection. Like, this is seriously a big deal to them. So their work style is very personal and collaborative, as you can imagine, but they want to make a big impact, and they have all those technological tools to do that, and they're very entrepreneurial. The cool thing about this generation is that they have a higher percentage of entrepreneurs than any other cohort before them, because they know how to harness the power of social media. And if they have a great idea, they start these campaigns, and they do this fundraising, and they get their product out there, and it's just incredible what this generation can do. So I'm really excited to see what they're going to do for the workplace and business. So any other questions or comments about Zs or any of the cohorts that we talked about today?
Are we gonna have like a Woodstock 2.0 or something coming soon with like the going green and
Legalization of marijuana.
legalizing marijuana? Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing I want you to know about these generations, one time I was teaching a leadership class and generations came up, and I was just trying to explain how baby boomers shaped X and how Ys were shaped and all these things, just kind of trying to tell the story, right? Because it makes sense when you think about it in context. And somebody raised their hand and they're like, why are you always blaming baby boomers for the Generation Y? And I'm like, I'm not blaming anybody. Like, there's no blame here, right? We all are who we are, and we bring great things to the workplace, and just capitalizing on those strengths rather than letting it cause differences. That's really the whole point of today. So all generations have similar values, and this is where we're all more alike than we are different, right? Family tops the list for all generations. And loyalty depends on context. We think of baby boomers as loyal to their business, and those millennials, you know, they just kind of float around. But really part of that has to do with maturity. Baby boomers have been in the workplace a long time. They have that age and the wisdom. Where millennials are just starting to learn it. And we're going to have to teach the Zs too. So research has found that hours worked has more to do with the level in the organization than age, right? And you increase your levels with age. So it kind of all makes sense. The higher the level, the more hours worked. So leaders, all generations believe that leaders should be trustworthy. Everybody wants to learn and have their company invest in them. Everyone likes feedback, and everyone wants respect. And those are some of the similarities that you can capitalize on. So I think we'll stop here. I just want to point out, you do have a generational chart in front of you just for your reference. You can take it back and share it with people in your department or work area. And then on the back, if you want some homework or maybe some team building opportunity for your department, you can just work through these questions and really think critically about generations in my workplace. What are we doing to capitalize on those strengths? What are we doing to bring people together and create synergy? And not necessarily ignore the differences and the challenges, but find ways to really make them an advantage and an opportunity. So any final questions before we wrap up today? All right, well, thank you so much for your participation, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.